Back during the mid-90s, there was a surge in a particular type of game for the home consoles. This was ushered in mostly by the release of the Super Nintendo in 1991. Before this time, we were mostly limited to action-adventure games, simulators, fighters, and racing-type games. The particular type of game I'm referring to, of course, is the RPG. Now, there were releases in this genre before this time period, such as the Dragon Warrior series, called Dragon Quest for the rest of the time, and everywhere except here in America, and of course the original Final Fantasy, both released on the NES. But something happened during the early 90s, where Japanese companies, based on feedback on the sales of these games, started looking more at America as a safe place for the genre. Unfortunately, as in the case of the Final Fantasy series, we wouldn't see another stateside release, apart from the original, for almost 5 years. And even then, it was already Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy II and III would be unreleased and unplayable for easily the next decade and a half, until they were remade and finally released in America in various ports for different systems. Now, to be honest, growing up, besides the original Dragon Warrior, the RPG genre would take a primarily backseat in my adventures in gaming. At the time, and who can argue, I don't think I really had the patience to sit through these, quote, longer games. Not to mention keeping the story straight, the endless battles, tactics, spells, maps, etc., etc. Back then, I was just like, give me Mario, give me Mega Man, give me fucking, I don't know, Super Turrican. Damn, does that soundtrack rock? Later on, as the original PlayStation started gaining momentum, and Nintendo started falling by the wayside to these newer consoles with higher power and much better graphics, there was a turning point. As it's probably already been said, ad infinitum at this point, by countless fellow gamers, this turning point for me was Final Fantasy VII. Since that story is a totally different beast altogether, we'll leave it for another review. However, it did affect me in terms of understanding the genre, appreciating the characters, the story, the combat, and just the overall experience that an RPG can provide. Final Fantasy VII was released in 1997, but let's roll back the clock about 5 years, and we end up in the right spot, and the point of this review. Final Fantasy V, my favorite of the original what I call the cartridge series. These refer to the first 6 Final Fantasies before the transition to CD. What? Yeah. Unlike a vast majority of my fellow gamers, Final Fantasy VI is not my favorite. It's not a bad game by any measure, just not my favorite. Final Fantasy V was released in Japan on the Super Famicom in 1992. And much like the majority of Square's early titles, was never given an American release until years later in 1999, with the Final Fantasy Anthology release on the PlayStation. This review is going to be focusing on the original, since I find the Super Nintendo graphics and presentation a little more enjoyable from an overview than a newer, updated version. The main reason I like Final Fantasy V as the best of the original line is mostly because of the job system. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The storyline in Final Fantasy V is as follows. 1,000 years ago, a mage named Enuo tried taking over the world using an evil entity known as the Void. The people retaliated and defeated Enuo using 12 legendary weapons. Although Enuo was beaten, the Void he tried to use couldn't be, so the people used the 4 elemental crystals, earth, air, fire, and water, and broke each one into 2 pieces, creating 2 separate worlds. The Void was sealed in the dimensional cleft between the 2 worlds, and time passed without incident. Fast forward to the present time, and a sinister force known as X-Death appears, and attempts the same plan of attack. Fortunately, as the prophecy foretold, as is the case in most of the early Final Fantasy games, 4 Heroes of Light appear to defeat X-Death, the main antagonist of this game. Pretty simple. I mean, there's a lot more to the overall story, and I'll touch on that during the review, but that's a quick overview. The game actually begins at Tycoon Castle with King Tycoon getting ready to depart for the Wind Shrine. Something's wrong, so he leaves his daughter Lena to watch over things while he's away. As he arrives at the Wind Shrine, the wind crystal shatters, and all of a sudden, all of the wind on the planet ceases. We're shown that 3 other characters have noticed these events happen as well, at different parts of the world. Next we see a meteor hurtling towards the planet and crash lands in a wooded area. This introduces us to the second of the 4 main characters, Bartz, who is just hanging out around a campfire with his chocobo. The pair take off to investigate and find Lena under attack. They save her and in turn find an old man, who identifies himself as Gluff, and has no past memories. Lena mentions the Wind Shrine, and although Gluff can't pinpoint a reason, he feels it's necessary for him to travel there. Bartz at first declines, but later changes his mind, and the threesome set out together. Since the Wind Shrine can only be accessed via water, the group needs a ship. They observe a pirate ship seemingly able to sail without there being any wind present. Deciding to steal the ship, they meet the 4th member of the party, Ferris, who is captain of the ship. After some interplay, Ferris decides to join the party, and reveals that the ship is able to move because it's being towed by a tame sea dragon named Sildra. You arrive at the Wind Shrine only to find the shattered remains of the crystal laying about. Each crystal sparkles and is absorbed by each of the 4 members of the party, gifting them with the first jobs in the job system, which are Knight, Monk, Thief, Black Mage, White Mage, and Blue Mage. Now, I'm going to diverge for a minute to talk about something else. The main reason why I picked Final Fantasy V as my first Final Fantasy review: the fucking job system. Unlike the majority of other releases in the series, Final Fantasy V and its job system gives you nearly limitless replayability. While variations of it appear in Final Fantasy III and Final Fantasy X-2, I've always found its iteration in this game to be the most enjoyable. Basically, this is how it works. You pick a character, and then assign them a certain job class, let's say Knight. Each specific class carries with it certain stat boosts. With a Knight, you automatically get higher strength and stamina. On top of that, you gain access to job-specific abilities. These abilities include not only in battle, but outside battle as well. For the Knight class, it allows you to dual-wield weapons and gives you the Guard ability, which allows the Knight to take no physical damage during the next attack. The other main ability is Cover, which allows the Knight to cover another party member and take damage for them. For each battle your party engages in and is successful, you gain AP points. These in turn level up your specific job class, and each time the next level is reached per class, you gain new abilities. The main reason that the job system is so much fun in this game is that, regardless of what level your specific class is at, once you change jobs, the abilities you earned with the previous job carry over. Unfortunately, your job-specific stats do not, so you really have to decide when you switch jobs, which abilities you want, which stats you're willing to lose. Lastly, each job also has specific types of weapons available, so again, if you prefer using swords or staves, you have to choose accordingly. There exists a total of 17 available jobs in the entire game, 18 if you count the default, Freelancer, with a group of jobs being gained every time you visit one of the 4 crystals in the game. Other favorites of mine include the Dragoon, Samurai, Knight, Ninja, and Summoner. You progress through the game fighting random battles, gaining experience, weapons, potions, spells, and even summon spirits. such as series classic Ifrit. You'll encounter many other characters, enemies, and bosses. Besides the greatness that is Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy V has one of the most in-depth stories of the original Super Nintendo Final Fantasy games. The characters, storylines, action, information, it's all awesome. Through the progression of the game, you learn that the crystals once formed a sort of prison for Exdeath, and with them destroyed, chaos and shit hitting the fan would ensue. The four warriors travel to some sort of interdimensional rift for the final battle. Yeah, this game has a lot of jumping between worlds and even dimensions. Probably one of the reasons why Square thought this game wouldn't work for American audiences back when it was released, and so, we were stiffed. Graphics are outstanding, with many shaders, sprites, and background graphics really filling in the world as you journey through it. The developers really knew how to make as much as possible with the power of the Super Nintendo as they were given. The soundtrack is awesome, with many memorable tracks and sound effects. The direction is top-notch, although I've always felt that things seem to fall apart during the last third of the game. I don't know if it's the game, the directing, the storyline, I'm not really sure. Overall, Final Fantasy V is an amazing addition to the series, and one that I truly remember as being one of Square's first great RPGs that I was exposed to. There were other games that came before it, true, but this one, for some reason, really struck a note. If you ever have the chance to play it on the original Super Nintendo, I highly recommend it, although you'll need a Japanese Super Famicom to do so, without the aid of emulators. There have been other versions that have been released in the States since then on various consoles. It is one of the all-time classics from the Super Nintendo days, and it's really a shame that us in the US never got to experience it until well into the PlayStation era. It's awesome! Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, go check it out. Don't forget to check out my Twitch account for live shoot-'em-up action, my real-time playthrough videos, MAME Mondays, and other fun gaming videos as well. That the ship is able to move because it's being towed by a tame sea dragon named Sildra. And reveals that the ship is able to move because it's being towed by a tame sea dragon named Sildra.